So, welcome everyone. My name's David Baldacchino. I'm the Head of Operations Support for Canal and River Trust. Welcome to this webinar on safety and safety culture. It's a really important subject, isn't it? It's something that we should all be worried about, and especially those of us involved in the restoration field, where we have, through getting involved with engineering things, building things, fixing things, taking things apart. There's plenty of opportunity for people to get hurt if we're not all paying attention and not all doing the right things. So I'm joined today by Verena Linardini. Verena, do you just want to say hello?
Yeah, that's true. I'm Verena, and I'm Event and Restoration Hub Coordinator with IWA.
And we're joined as well by Mikk Bradley, who is health and safety lead, I think, in the IWA. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about the safety regulation and all the things that apply. Then hopefully at the end there'll be time to perhaps have a conversation about safety culture, problems that you might be having, and things that we might be able to do. Maybe there's common solutions out there or things that people have found that work to help improve safety in the works that they are doing. So I hope all that sounds good. Verena, is there anything else that you wanted to say before we start?
Yes, just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. So you will all have your microphones muted and your cameras switched off. If you would like to ask any questions to Mikk, to our speaker, you can add all questions in the Q&A box that you find at the bottom of the screen. If you want to comment or to share any experiences, then please use the chat box. You can also change the chat options to all panelists and attendees, so we can all see your comments. But most importantly, please put your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, because otherwise they will get lost probably. This webinar will be recorded, so we will share the link of the recording in due course, so we can all refer back to it at any time. And on this note, I will hand over to Mikk.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. We've had technical issues here today, so I'm sitting in the store cupboard, just ready to start my webinar for you all. I can't see who's on the call, but let's get started straight away then. Some of you may know me. I'm Mikk Bradley. I'm a retired chartered civil engineer. I've worked in the construction industry for all my working life, over 40 years. Mostly on water-based projects with the Environment Agency and Canal and River Trust. I've had 2 spells with both British Waterways and CRT, working in their technical section firstly, and then as an asset engineer on the Waterways of London. More recently, I was IWA's technical support officer. I provided technical support, health and safety advice to Waterway Recovery Group, other restoration groups, IWA branches, and various other boat clubs and people who needed help. I have my NEBOSH certificate in health and safety management for construction in the UK, so I've got a bit of authority about health and safety issues. Okay, now the title of the talk today is Attitudes to Health and Safety in the Restoration Sector, but I'm not going to limit this just to the restoration sector, though some of the talk later on will be more focused on the construction side of things. But really, this is just about attitudes and your attitudes. So I'm probably going to pose some rhetorical questions, not necessarily for you to answer, but just for you to think about. So what does attitude to health and safety mean? Are we talking about safety behaviour? Or are we talking about behavioural safety? Now you say, well, what's the difference? Well, safety behaviour is you take time to make things safe, perhaps. Whereas behavioural safety is things you do out of habit, such as putting your PPE on, or personal protective equipment, for those who don't know what that is, keeping the site tidy. So with both safety behaviour and behavioural safety, you're developing a culture of safety on your site. So I'm going to now try and share my screen. So bear with me if it doesn't go straight into the slideshow. There we go. So that's the opening slide. So how can we stop this sort of thing happening? Well, does the guy in the picture know that he's doing anything wrong to start with? And does he realize the danger? Well, surely he would be putting his foot in a chipper like that. Ask the question, why is he doing it? And then, is there an alternative? So this is the sort of attitude that we want to get rid of on our works and on our sites. So what will I be talking about today? Well, first of all, we've got to look at the legal stuff, and that's the Health and Safety at Work Act. And then we can see what you need to do, and I'll introduce you to HSG 65. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. I'm just going to give you an overview. After all, we've only got an hour. We could be talking about regulations and then what tools there are for you to use, such as risk assessments and what you find in CDM. Then I'm going to talk about where you can go for advice. And finally, who can provide support. And that's where you're looking at other groups, branches and clubs, Canal and River Trust, IWA, and of course you've got myself. Here we come. First piece of legal stuff. Try and keep awake. So Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974. So what was there before 1974? Well, there were various pieces of legislation that were all brought together in this one act. It's what's known as an enabling act, which allows the government to make health and safety regulations that become part of the law. Now that's important, it's actually law. The Health and Safety at Work Act applies to any organisation with at least one employee. So should you comply? Well, it's a grey area for voluntary group because you probably don't employ anyone. But if you were to do something and the health and safety executive were called to your site and you hadn't been following the correct regulations or guidance, then you will be found guilty. In the general requirements of the Health and Safety at Work Act, it says it shall be the duty of every employer to ensure, now this is the important part, so far as is reasonably practicable. So that phrase comes up time and time again in health and safety regulations. So you've got to look after the health and safety and welfare at work of all your employees. So you have to provide a safe place of work with safe equipment and adequate welfare facilities. The employer's duties are health and safety of their workers, safe plant, controls of substances, and this is important again, you provide information, instruction, training and supervision. The employee has duties as well. So the employee's duties are the health and safety of themselves and others working with them. And they need to cooperate with their employer and not to fear with anything that's provided for health and safety. The last thing is, it's very important, this is a two-way thing, you need to report anything that is dangerous. In addition, the Health and Safety at Work Act established the Health and Safety Executive. Health and Safety Executive inspectors have powers to enter your property at any time and they can enforce any regulations. So I've said the Health and Safety at Work Act is an enabling act and the government can set regulations. Now the regulations are made by government, they become law, and they give more detail on how employers comply with the Health and Safety at Work Act. You may be aware of some of the regulations such as personal protective equipment regulations, manual handling regulations, These are all parts of the law. In addition to the regulations, you have what are known as approved codes of practices. Now, these aren't legal documents. They're provided as guidance. And if you do some work and you're not following an approved code of practice, you can't be prosecuted, but they would look at that and see whether you were following a reasonable method when you were doing your work. Health and Safety Executive also issue guidance. Again, the guidance is not compulsory, but you're free to take other action. If you do not follow the guidance, you may not be doing enough to comply with the law. Then finally, you've got British standards. Now, British standards are used to ensure consistency throughout various activities. Perhaps you're laying concrete, placing concrete, and it's just to make sure the concrete is going to be to the same standard as other people are using. So let's have a look at this document, Health and Safety. It's a guidance note, HSG 65. It was first published in 2013, and it applies to all organisations. It has a legal duty. It was prepared by the Health and Safety Executive, and it gives advice on core elements of managing health and safety. It's deciding if you are doing what you need to do. It means delivering effective arrangements, and it provides useful resources. It introduces something that's called the plan, do, check, action, act approach. In this, the plan element, it determines your health and safety policy and the arrangements that you put in place for your workers. I'm not going to call them employees, I'm going to call them workers. And it allows you to plan for the implementation of your policy, how you're going to safeguard your workers. It looks at work risks and controls put in place. The do part of it is profiling risks and organising for health and safety. It means implementing your plan. It's managing the control measures that you've identified. The check part is where you measure your performance. You monitor before events, and then you investigate after events. This is where you see whether what you've planned actually works or whether it needs modifying. And then the act part is you review your performance and then act on any lessons you may have learned. So what do you need to put in your health and safety policy? Well, to start with, I would say it's the foundation of your organisation regarding health and safety. It's a tool for managing health and safety. It says how you will manage health and safety. More importantly, it explains who will do what, when they would do it, and how they would do it. It can be a simple statement, but you will need to follow that up with more specific arrangements, even naming people who are going to do things. If you've got more than 5 employees or more than 5 workers, you need to write it down. But if you haven't got more than 5, how are you going to communicate it to your workers? Well, I think it's good practice to write it down anyway. It should be reviewed regularly. You can decide whether that's annually, biannually, or whatever. It must be signed and dated. Most importantly, you must communicate it to your workers. There are three areas that you must deal with. You must have a statement of intent, responsibilities for health and safety, and arrangements for health and safety. Lastly, it's a legal requirement to write a policy, and that's included in the Health and Safety at Work Act, and the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations explain the steps that you must take to manage health and safety. So these regulations, the latest revision is dated 1999. They're still relevant today. The main requirement that comes out of these regulations is Regulation 3, which says you must make a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. It means that you've got to address specific risks, such as young people, new and expectant mothers. Again, this is magic 5 number again. If you've got more than 5 employees, you need to write down and record your significant findings. If you don't have 5 employees, you don't need to write it down, but I would suggest you keep a record of when it was done. You need to communicate it. You need to communicate any risk assessment to your workers, and you should allow them to respond to you if what you've put down in your risk assessment isn't working. The other thing that the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations introduce is the principles of prevention. Now then, the principles of prevention are, to start with, it's a hierarchy. So avoid risks. I think that's probably obvious. And then evaluate the risks that cannot be avoided. Try and combat the risks at source. Adapt the work to the individual, especially regarding the design of workplaces, the choice of work equipment, and the choice of working and production methods, with a view in particular to alleviating monotonous work and work at a predetermined work rate, and to reduce their effect on health. You need to adapt to technical progress. You need to replace the dangerous by the not dangerous or less dangerous. An example of that is you would use 240 volts on site. You would reduce the voltage to 110 or use battery powers. You need to develop a coherent overall prevention policy which covers technology, organisation of work, working conditions, social relationships, and the influence of factors relating to the working environment. You should give collective protection measures priority over individual protective measures. This is such as putting a barrier up to avoid a drop rather than providing a harness. And finally, you need to give appropriate instructions to your workers. Now, the regulations also introduce health and safety arrangements, the effective planning, organisation, control and monitoring and review of the preventive and protective measures. It also introduces the elements of health surveillance. Risk assessments, here we go. I can hear everyone groaning even from here. That's all we talk about in health and safety, isn't it? Have you got a risk assessment for this? Have you got a risk assessment for that? It's really common sense, and you're just following your common sense procedure. And it's something that everyone does without thinking. For instance, you probably walked across the road this morning. You didn't just step out in the road. You found a safe place to cross, check to see if the road was clear before you crossed. That's you doing a personal risk assessment, and you didn't even think about it. So I'm not going to go into details of how you write a risk assessment. There's guidance for that later on. It can be linked to a method statement if you've got a method statement. It's a key tool for managing risk. Apart from the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, Many other regulations require you to do a risk assessment, such as manual handling, control of substances hazardous to health, vibration, noise, personal protective equipment, and display screen equipment. So if you're sitting in front of your computer at work, have you done a display screen equipment assessment? So preparing a risk assessment, the first step is you identify hazards. And then you identify, or you decide who might be affected, how they could be harmed, and then you evaluate the risks. Once you've evaluated the risks, you look at what control measures you can implement to reduce the risk. You record your findings. And then once you've written it all down and you've communicated it to workers, you review the controls and you start again. See whether those controls are working or whether you need to adjust them. Things can change. If you're working on a construction site, things can change. And you may need to adjust. You may change your method. Someone might have dug a hole and you can't get to the work. So things change, and that's where you need to carry out what's known as an on-site risk assessment. You might have all your risk assessments written out and it's all going well, and then the weather conditions change, and they change what you can do and how you can do it. So you've got to take these factors into account. Now, this is for the construction design and management regulations. Now, this is an important set of regulations for anyone who's doing construction. They were first written in 1994. And since 1994, there have been a marked number in reducing the number of accidents and incidents on construction sites. They were reviewed in 2007, reviewed again in 2015, and are currently in force. Now, these regulations are collected or generally known as CDM, and everyone who mentions CDM will send shivers up your spine. So it's the regulations aren't just about creating enormous amounts of paperwork. The main aim is that health and safety risks on your site are considered and addressed from the conception to completion. So it means that designers need to think about how the job's going to be built. In fact, they need to be thinking about how it's going to be maintained and how it's going to be taken apart at the end of its life. This is where it talks about from conception to completion. It's all about appointing the right people at the right time. It applies the general principles of prevention, which is what we've just talked about from the management of health and safety at work regulations. It's about ensuring that everyone has information, instruction, training, and supervision. There are various duty holders. It means that duty holders have to cooperate with each other and communicate. You should consult with workers and engage with them. This is a two-way dialogue. Some restoration groups might take on more than one role. They may be client and designer, maybe contractor as well, and they're almost certainly going to have workers. But if you're just a single organisation doing all the duties, you still must follow the stages to discharge your duties. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So let's start on to who is there to help you? Well, health and safety executive are probably the first port of call. They have a lot of information on their website. They're the national regulator for workplace health and safety. They were formed as part of the Healthy and Safety at Work Act when it was introduced. They are dedicated to protecting people and places. Their role goes beyond worker protection to include public assurance. They work to ensure people feel safe where they live, where they work, and in their environment. There's a range of material on their website, guidance notes. You can find links to the regulations and to the approved codes of practices. One of the things that you can do to keep up to date is you can sign up to their newsletter. They will then send you regular updates on health and safety, and you can keep up to date with what's going on in the world of health and safety. They advertise training events, exhibition shows, that kind of thing. What are your other sources of advice? Well, the CITB, that's the Construction Industry Training Board. They have useful guides, and they have a whole suite of forms and checklists to help you with your work. They also offer training courses. They introduced the CSCS and the CPCS cards. Now, these are cards for your workers that ensures they have an understanding of health and safety. To gain a CSCS card, that's Construction Safety Certificate Scheme, you carry out some training so that you've got a basic knowledge of health and safety, and you sit a short test. It's a multiple choice test. You answer questions, you have to get more than 80% to pass, and then you have a card which demonstrates to any employer or potential employer that you're trained to a certain standard and you have a certain understanding of health and safety. The Inland Waterways Association and the Waterway Recovery Group can offer advice. We have a suite of documents called the Practical Restoration Handbook, which I believe are 26 chapters. These can be found on the IWA website. If you look in the Restoration Hub, I believe you need to register with the IWA to get access to the hub. But once you're there, you can find the Practical Restoration Handbook, guidance notes, and a whole lot of other information. There's training videos as well, safety videos. I haven't put this down, but I looked at it this morning. Canal and River Trust also have health and safety advice on their website. If I just clicked onto their website and looked for health and safety, and there's a whole raft of information that you have access to. You can also talk to other groups. There are forums where you might be able to meet other restoration groups, other boat clubs, other branches, such as the IWA CRT Restoration Conference come up in March. Plug. Get yourself registered as soon as you can. Festival of Water, you can meet other groups there. Canal Cavalcade. It's all about sharing experiences. You won't be the first people to do something. Someone would have done it before you. Plug into that information and use it. Finally, if you've tried everyone, then you can look to independent consultants. But for those, you're quite likely to have to dip your hand in your pocket and pay them some money. How are we going for time? Yeah, it's probably going to leave plenty of time for questions. So in conclusion, your organisations have a legal duty to manage health and safety of your workers where you're expecting them to work. You need to provide a safe place of work. You need to provide them with safe equipment. you need to have a health and safety policy written down. And I would suggest that you make health and safety an important item in any meetings that you have. For instance, when you have a meeting, make the first item on your agenda a health and safety item, just to increase awareness. A culture of health and safety starts with your trustees down to your volunteers. It's a two-way thing, so the volunteers will then feed back to your trustees. Consider appointing a health and safety representative. This is someone that you could perhaps task with signing up to the health and safety executive newsletter, news bulletins, and ask them to report back to you. Or it could be that you have several people look at health and safety and monitor it. You can use toolbox talks to highlight specific risks in activities. And for any activity, use an induction process for all new volunteers. Again, use sources for guidance such as the Health and Safety Executive, CITB, IWA, CRT, and all else fails, I'm here for advice. Thank you for your attention. I'll hand back to David and we'll try and answer any questions you may have.
Mick, that's great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for going through all of that. It's really, it's really important to understand, isn't it, the legal framework that goes behind all of this. And it may feel daunting. It may feel it's overwhelming. For some people, it may be. I suppose for some, it may just feel that it's too much. But at the end of the day, this is all about making sure that everybody who comes to get involved in construction activities or maintenance activities, and for us, all the people who are coming to help out with the restoration activity, all go home with the same number of fingers and toes that they came with on the day. Because I tell you what, it doesn't half ruin the day when somebody has an accident. And we none of us want to. I guess we none of us want to feel like that we could have done something differently that would have avoided that for people. I'd be really interested in hearing people's thoughts, or hearing people's thoughts about about how things are going with their groups. Have you got any sort of key areas that you would want to see the Restoration Hub working on, providing more information on? Is there stuff that we could do differently? How can we help you work all through this? Do you feel you've got it sorted? Have you done something brilliant in your groups that have helped move on your safety culture and been a great success? Is there something that others can learn from? All things that would be worthy of discussion at this point. I'm just going to open the floor up and hope somebody puts their hand up. Terry's asked, are there any thoughts on working next to roads and traffic management? So traffic and traffic management is a pretty heavily regulated area in my experience. I think it's chapter 8 of the traffic signs and road traffic signs and traffic signs directive is a whole piece of legislation in itself about the requirements for working on roads and working next to roads, both with the safety of the road user as well as the people who are behind the enclosure in mind. It is an area where there are experts, and if you're uncertain about what you should be doing with this, I wouldn't feel competent to give advice on what signs should be going out, what signs should be going out, where the cones should be, what the layout should be. It all depends on the speed of the traffic, speed of the road, all those sorts of things. So it is an area where I think some expert advice should be sought. I think the other thing to say is that any work on roads pretty much has to be with the authorization of the local authority as well. So you can't just rock up and start putting an enclosure on. There's quite a strong coordination process that goes on through the local authorities with the utilities and everyone to actually make sure that's all aimed at making sure there aren't too many closures on any roads at any one time, or closures too frequently, or ideally coordinating things so that any work that has to be done can all be done at the same time. So Terry, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my first thoughts on that.
What we found at Wendover Canal Trust was that to apply for a closure of a footpath or a road, you need to have people who are trained to operate and supervise a road closure. And for both of those, you can't have the same person doing the operation as well as the supervision. So you need to have two people trained, and it's trained in things like putting the signages out and identifying underground services, the use of a CAT detector or cable avoidance tool for those who don't know what CAT means. So it's not something that you, as David said, it's not something you can just rock up and get on with. You have to go through certain processes, and there will be a time limit on it as well.
What sort of road are you trying to work on, Terry? A5. Oh, that's glad to see you're not picking on a busy one then. Not digging up a motorway somewhere. Various. Okay. Yeah. And the more significant the road, usually the harder it is to actually get the permission to go onto it. I suppose that's the other thing to say. Okay, thanks for that. Have we got any more questions or thoughts? We at Canal River Trust, we're always looking at our always trying to learn and improve in our safety and safety management, and it is just relentless. And I think it's worth remembering that. The lowest standard you set in safety is the lowest standard you accept. And I guess we're on this call because either we have a responsibility or a particular passion for the subject. And you can't just walk past stuff. That's probably the biggest learning I've had in my experience is not to walk past things. You see something that's wrong, just go and do something about it. And by doing that, you sort of osmose out. Attitudes and culture sort of osmoses out. And the other thing is just making sure you're listening to people as well. Hear what people are saying about the difficulties they may be having, about the way that they may be being asked to do work. Very often it's the people who are doing the work who know best what to do and how to go about it. But our obligations are to make sure that's done safely. So Martin asks, which health and safety risks relating to canal restoration are least often properly addressed, needing particular attention? That's a really good question. Mick, what's your experience there?
I would say probably probably the biggest risk, and it probably gets ignored, is manual handling, because anywhere out about any restoration site, there's involves some form of manual handling, not just lifting heavy loads, but repetitive actions, digging, barrowing, anything like that is going to involve manual handling. And then weather conditions. How many sites are muddy, slippery? So slips, trips, and falls. That's going to come into place. I would say access as well. Everyone runs up and down a canal bank. Will spend time to cut some steps so that you've got a safe access, or put ladders up, secured ladders up. I wouldn't say there is one specific risk that is the most overlooked. Other risks, I would say majority of canal restorations are in dry conditions. There may well be a towpath that's being restored, that you've got the risk of falls and heights. And if the water was in the canal, you've got that other risk of falling into the water, where you've not only got the possibility of drowning, but you could also come across leptospirosis.
That's an interesting one at the moment, isn't it? So Terry's put into here temporary works is he thinks is the biggest area of risk, especially where barriers are set up for a long time. You know what? So there's a range of things, isn't there? Really, well, this is demonstrating about what are the areas of risk. I would have, for ourselves, based on current trust experience, it's no surprise slips and trips, falls from small heights, I would say, are the areas where we are where we see repeated, sometimes quite significant injuries. Not appreciating that something is slippery. We've had a few incidents recently on workboats where the inside of the deck of a workboat or the whole of the workboat is wet, and therefore the timbers are slippery. Those are just things that can be unappreciated, just not necessarily thought about. So many incidents, so many accidents that I see can just be dealt with, or could have been dealt with, just through better housekeeping. So I think that sort of attention to detail is really important. But there are areas I think which are not well understood, and I suspect that Terry's comment there about temporary works is a really good example. Putting fences up, making sure that you've got the right registers in place, making sure that somebody's nominated to actually supervise that, that you're not doing something, if you're doing something that's been properly designed, if it needs a design, that you're checking that the thing is in place, and all those stuff, making sure all those records, once you're on a construction site, are in place is really important, for obvious reasons, I suppose, isn't it? The temporary works are there to keep people safe while a situation is temporary. So those are my thoughts. Just a few other comments coming in now. So we've got any thoughts on training approach for organisations that are, this is from Mick, sorry, any thoughts on training approach for organisations that are composed of volunteers rather than employees? See it any differently, from induction training through to any more specific training? How is training, and particularly how that is recorded, is arguably a bigger challenge with a part-time and ever-changing workforce. For myself, I don't disagree with that. We make, and I don't think the health and safety executive makes any differentiation between volunteers and paid employees. If people are doing work and they're being asked to do some work, then whoever's asking doing the work has the obligations to make sure that they do that safely. And that goes along with training and everything else. What might be different between volunteers and employees is the type of people's perception of safety, and where they, and their tolerance, if you like, of hazards and risks. It's, some people will, and I think that the length of time, perhaps, when people are retired, sometimes somebody's awareness of those sorts of things, or awareness of current legislation, sort of can sometimes end at that person's ending of their employment, for example. So when they come to you, you might have to update them, make sure that they are up to date, and up to date with the standards that you're expecting on your site. Nick says, on restoration works and where volunteers are doing waterway maintenance, who determines the competence of the person in charge of any works? Mick, do you want to cover that? Do you want to say anything about that?
I was just going to come in on the previous question about training.
Yeah.
One of the very useful tools is toolbox talks. And with the IWA guidance notes, there's a whole suite of toolbox talks that can be rolled out to your volunteers. So, for instance, if you're doing something like, let's say, brickwork, there'd be a toolbox talk on how to set up the mixer.
Yeah.
There's a whole suite of toolbox talks that you can use, and they're intended as, say, 5-minute, 10-minute bites of instruction that you can give your volunteers when they turn up on site. The other thing is to impress on your volunteers. If they don't know how to do something, ask someone who does. And this is where you need to use your experienced volunteers to help the new volunteers. You're quite likely to get people from all walks of life that haven't got experience of the type of work you're doing, and that's where you need to spend probably 5 or 10 minutes at the start of each day just explaining what you're going to be doing that day and how you're going to be doing it, before everyone rushes off and starts pushing wheelbarrows around, getting tools out the stores or whatever. Going back to the competence question, I would say you would look at look within your own organisation. For someone to be competent, they need to have the knowledge and experience of that activity. So there's no point in putting a brand new volunteer to lead a team. You need to choose your team leaders on your knowledge of their previous experience and their previous knowledge. And I don't know whether Canal and River Trust with their volunteers, I would think they would probably supervise them, or they would expect the organisation that are doing the work for them to have established their own competent leaders for each activity.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. We a large number of our the volunteering activity that's taking place for the trust is supervised in the sense that somebody, not on any given day, there may be somebody in charge, like who isn't that supervisor, but somebody should have done a risk assessment, made sure that that they've been through the stuff, making sure that the work that's going on the ground on the day is meets the requirements. As I say, we don't make any differentiation between our paid teams and our volunteers. It's very important not to make that differentiation. I think some groups want to take care of their own safety, and so we have where that's more established, we go through a review process with people, with groups, to make sure that they are, so that we can be happy that they have the ability to manage their own safety themselves. And we get that, we understand that. I think that people want to be perhaps a bit more independent. So that's so we're trying to find a middle ground through there for everyone and for all interested parties. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not. We just to echo the point, competence is two-pronged. It's about knowledge and experience, isn't it? And somebody with knowledge and experience needs to make sure that the other person who the question is to their satisfaction, they are meeting the requirements. Now, that there's a complete spectrum there. Somebody using hand tools is not going to be subject to the same level of scrutiny as, say, somebody who's wielding a chainsaw. And in some areas there's legislative requirements or specific training for the more complex, more hazardous activities that you'd expect. So you need to be familiar with where certificates are required, make sure that those are in place. But there's nothing like stepping back and watching somebody work either, is there? And just being happy that they aren't doing anything daft just because somebody's got all the certificates and they've done the training doesn't mean that they're actually going to work to an acceptable standard. Not so much a question for now, but could our CRT IWA set up a forum where we can post questions and issues, as I often feel that we can't be the only one to? Fair point, Douglas. Thank you for that. We'll take that away yeah, I'm taking it away and see what can be done.
Yeah, sorry for coming back to that one, David. IWA has an inquiries line on the Restoration Hub. You can set.
Of course it does. Yes. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. You can post your inquiries there, and they will get directed out. If it's an engineering query, it may well go to the honorary engineers. Health and safety will probably come to me. We've also got building surveyors, and I think we've got an environmental. Oh, sorry, there is an environmentalist there as well. I mean, that would be a first port of call. Put an inquiry into the IWA Restoration Hub, and that can be posted out. It might be that we know that there's a restoration group that are doing that particular activity, and you can be directed to talk to them. So that's probably a first port of call.
And looking at the next question from Dave Wedd, Mick, you got any thoughts around that one?
Yes, yeah.
Because I know what I think, but it might be better coming from you.
But Dave is saying, who is responsible? Well, if you're not happy with the health and safety arrangements, you should let your host society know. That's my view. As I said earlier, it's a two-way thing. And you certainly shouldn't, if you're a leader of a regional group that's going out onto different sites, you certainly shouldn't be allowing your volunteers to do something that you consider is unsafe. And you should point out, for instance, if there's an unsafe workplace, you have the right to not work in that, and to let your host society say no, that you don't feel that they've provided a safe place of work, and you can recommend what you would suggest, what you would like to see.
I think this was an hour session, wasn't it, Mick?
I think it was.
Yeah, and we're just about at the end of that. So
one thing I would say is, if following this people go away and think of something they want to ask, and they can always, as I say, they've got the opportunity of inquiring at the Restoration Hub at IWA, sending in a question there, and they can get passed over.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Mick. I'm just checking that I have unmuted myself now. Okay, that's brilliant. Well, look, the questions seem to have dried up, so it's probably time to start to wrap up. Mick, have you got any final thoughts? Anything that you want? Any key messages you want to leave people with?
I think the key message is to develop within your organisation a culture of health and safety, and to make your volunteers aware that if they're not happy with something, to approach the team leader or the management or the trustees or whatever. And the other thing I would say is give health and safety the budget and the I can't think of the word, but you need to give it the attention that it needs, and so often you'll find that health and safety doesn't get mentioned until something comes up. So I'm saying make it a point of your meetings. You've got an activity going on, you're perhaps litter picking right at the start. Just point out one or two risks and dangers, and then make sure everyone's aware of them, and introduce health and safety item to all your meetings.
That's brilliant, Mick. Thanks very much. For myself, I would just say, it is just reflect on it is relentless, and I come back to that point about the lowest standard that you accept is the lowest standard you set is the one that you accept. Don't walk past stuff. Make sure everybody knows that it's okay to stop, and don't do stuff. Don't carry on regardless. Watch out for those circumstances. Okay, so time to give a little bit of a big up, I think, for the Restoration Conference, which is coming up on the 13th of April. Look out for the bookings for that. All of you involved in restoration, please look out for that. Get booked on. It's going to be a great day. Good agenda coming together for that. Thank you to Mick for taking your time today and going through all of this. Thank you to Verena for battling with the IT right at the beginning there. And that's that, I think. Take care, everyone, and I look forward to catching up with you all soon. All right, cheerio.